We're joined by Diane Swonk. She is chief economist at Grant Thornton, and she's joining us via the phone from Chicago. Diane, if you can hit *6 for us, we can chat about those jobless claims numbers and their implications as well for the broader economy. First of all, 6.6 million, and this to me seems to perhaps, we're only going to see a trend higher because still a lot of folks are having trouble filing.
That's exactly right. One of the things that was really difficult was the upward revisions to last week. We've now lost over 16 million jobs in 3 weeks' time. That's, not far from when we look at the undercounting, the inability of people to file, also people who are now eligible, but their state websites have not been fully updated yet. They just weren't designed to handle the sheer volume of activity that they're having. We're probably well over 18 million. And if you think of what we saw during the height of the losses in jobs during 2008 and 2009, that was 8.8 million. So we're doubling that in the course of 4 weeks' time. It really gets to the sudden freeze the U.S. economy is going on and how rapidly things have done a U-turn and deteriorated quite sharply.
Diane, we watch historic measures taken to keep people afloat, but I'm curious, after we start to reopen the economy, what's the realistic picture? Can you help us see what it looks like putting people back to work? We're going to have 15% unemployment. How do we get that lower?
That's really important. One of the key issues is, you don't just we turned off the spigot on the U.S. economy. You don't turn it on when it's still COVID tainted in the waters as rapidly. You have to be very cautious and methodical. One of the points that Chairman Powell made today was that you need a plan to open the economy safely. You want to stay home and stay safe and not give up all of what we've done to curb infection rates and to keep more people healthy and alive. That's very important as we reopen as well. Without a vaccine, we need testing, we need tracking, we need treatments. We need to know that the COVID virus is at least treatable in a reasonable way as we reopen. And also we're going to need protocols. So this is really a complicated process as we slowly reopen. And I think the other thing we have to be cognizant, and Congress has to be be doing its multitasking here and continue to be quite awake at the wheel. And that is that many of the jobs that we had prior to the crisis may or may not be there on the other side of it, even as the economy regains some of its momentum. You can certainly understand that things like this have been an accelerant in the movement from, brick and mortar traditional retailers, which was already occurring, to online. Same to home delivery for groceries, same for delivery for food. And people won't be going out to the movies and getting a dinner anytime soon, even as we reopen the economy, to make sure that it is safe. And I think that's part of the process, is getting through that period, which is a slow ramp up, methodical ramp up, providing people with the means to keep the roof over their head and food on their table through this period. It's not just turn it on and everything's okay again.
Diane, Dan Howley here. I want to ask what you think the ultimate number will be of people who lose their jobs, and then what kind of impact will that have on the nation's GDP?
The real interesting issue is whether or not we really get the small business, which is important because we have already seen the need is greater than what we originally thought. Getting these small business grants, which will allow small businesses to rehire people, whether they'll be able to retain them past the September 30th date is still a question mark, but that will mitigate some of the layoffs we're seeing right now. So we're hoping to keep the net losses in employment to this sort of 15 million level mark. That is still stunning and staggering. But if we are able to temporarily at least put people back on payrolls again with these grants, that will help mitigate it. And then on the other side of it, keep them attached to their employers for at least some of them after the dust settles a bit to return to the work they once had work with. And I think that's a very important way of thinking about this. Some people will be able to return to their jobs. Some people will not. And that's the hard part. But that's why these small business grants are so important to get out the door for everything from restaurants to companies up to 499 people, to be able to keep people on payrolls, not just unemployment insurance, but keep them connected to their original employers.
It seems to me, though, Diane, that there are some jobs, because there are requirements, of course, through these various loans, the PPP loans, that you keep those people on the payroll or even hire them back if you've already let them go by a certain date. But there's so much lack of clarity in certain industries that I wonder if that's going to leave a lot of businesses by the wayside, that they're not going to be eligible for these loans because they can't financially hire these people back if they don't know they're going to have a business 6 months from now.
That is a real hurdle, and it is. I think it's a real problem. I've talked to an enormous number of small businesses of all different sizes, from 30 people to the restaurants with 50 people, some with only 10. And how do they know what kind of level of employment they'll need? Now, if they keep the workers on, it is a grant, and that's important, so they don't have much to lose on that side of it. But then there's another round of layoffs we could see again in the fourth quarter, and that's what we're worried about, is that, even if they're able to go through and keep the workers on because this turns into a grant and they get it forgiven by the government, that's good until September 30th, but it doesn't determine how many workers they will need on the other side of this and how their workplace has changed. They'll also need to deal with the costs of compliance, of sanitizing workplaces to make it clean, having enough protective personal equipment to be able to protect people if you're serving in a restaurant. All of those protocols need to be put in place before we can safely reopen, and also we need to think of what it costs for many of these businesses to adhere to what are going to be a different standard of sanitation just to keep everybody safe and spacing. You can't have a really crowded restaurant for any time soon. You're going to have tables spaced out. You're going to have people spaced out. All of those kinds of things, of course, are necessary to slowly reopen, but they do have a consequences, as you rightly noted, on how many workers you may have as well and the kinds of workers you're going to need.
Diane, when you think about the recovery, earlier Gary Cohn was on our program speaking about the segmentation or further segmentation that we can anticipate even as workers go back to their offices, right? So there's the A team, B team, making sure there's no overlap. How do you isolate people even over the next year or so to make sure that you're mitigating any of those risks that we're seeing right now? How do you anticipate the definition of full-time work to look like? Do you think that there will be more and more shifts, even for white-collar jobs, sort of like the blue-collar world?
I think you will. I think you'll see it come out and manifest itself in different ways. We're learning what works and what doesn't. Obviously, working from home, as that's what all of us are doing at the time being, that are able to do that. That's a good thing because it also is giving companies sort of the limits and parameters of what is required to work at home. And so it may be separating shifts, not necessarily going through the night or around the clock, but also separating people by days, which odd numbers, even number days, how many people do you have in any given office? Those are all going to be important things to get into the pipeline now so we know how we're going to ramp up. And of course, there will be frictions even as we do this. This is something we think about as economists, that it isn't just a return to normal when the disease is still out there. We have to manage, not everyone's is vaccinated. We don't have a vaccine for at least a year, if not longer. And that's what the most optimistic forecast with a lot of companies out there with vaccines in the pipeline, hopefully, but it still takes a long time to do the kind of trials we need also on treatments. So I think all these things are important to think about. Is we're going to re-enter as the world thaws, as this deep freeze we're in. The world that we thaw into is going to be similar but not the same as the one we left behind.
A lot of adjustments yet to come. Interesting, Diane. You're the second person we've spoken to today after Gary Cohn, who talked about a new, perhaps staggered work schedule for folks. Diane Swonk is chief economist at Grant Thornton. Diane, it is always good to talk to you. Be well, and thank you.
Be safe. Thank you.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.